So the question was submitted by a master gardener. I think they were talking about home garden plants, but also specifically a demo garden that was in a public park in a city. So deer problems are something that we get questions about every year. Unfortunately, there's not an easy, simple, or cheap way to keep deer out of the garden. And with drought years, we oftentimes see a lot more deer management in our managed portions of the landscape. So when we think about deer IPM, there's a couple of components. Population management, that involves managed hunts. We're not really going to talk about that. Although I will say I was speaking to a MDC, the state deer biologist, and he said basically the population levels are continuing to grow. Less people are hunting, so deer problems will be continuing to get worse as we move forward. Vegetation management, that basically involves leaving very wide field buffers between forested areas so that deer feel less comfortable going out into the open, but that's not always an option as well. So we're going to talk mainly about repellents and fencing. So in terms of repellents, how effective they are can sometimes relate to how hungry the deer are. Rain fastness obviously is a big concern. The time it takes, the cost of the application. These products work best when they're applied directly to the plants. They don't really work well as perimeter sprays. So I tried to poke around and find some actual research on these repellents because there's so many out there, it's hard to sort through all the information. So I found a publication from University of Connecticut, a research document on some trials that they did. So I thought I would share some of the findings of that research. And so I have some branded products here. Just know that these are not endorsed or approved by MU Extension. This is just information from their research trial. So they had a couple different options. They had an 8-foot woven wire fence that provided 100% control. And I should mention they were studying deer herbivory and damage on ewes. So Bobex was a product that gave 93% protection. So basically they had a control with ewes that were fenced off, and then they had weighed the plants at the end of the season, both the control and the ones that were not protected by fence. So this Bobex is a combination of different materials, putrescent eggs, rotten eggs, you'll see that in a lot of them. But this one with these combination of ingredients seemed to do a pretty good job at protection. It was applied every 10 to 14 days. The second product, which applied pretty good protection, was a product called Hinder, which is a different active ingredient, but also applied every 10 to 14 days. When I looked at the chart of all these different products, one thing that stood out was the products that performed the best had the most frequent application recommendations from the manufacturer. So keep in mind, these were results from a single study in Connecticut over a 2-year period. Deer pressure can definitely vary from year to year, and there was only one crop tested. But the ewes, I guess, were one of the crops that homeowners in Connecticut had stopped planting because there was so much pressure. So deterrents, there's physical deterrents in terms of scarecrows and things like that, but I'm not really going to cover that. There's not a lot of good information out there, but deterrents, generally we call them air cannons. Sometimes they're called gas exploders. These are often used in berry plantings and other orchard situations. You can set them to go off and basically make this explosive sound at different intervals. But for effectiveness, these need to be moved around the area and the frequency of the explosion needs to change. But the problem with this in a public setting, it's extremely loud, kind of like a gunshot. So probably not somewhere you'd want to have in a city park. So that leads us to fencing. There's a lot of different designs for electric fences, but these are, generally not recommended in public areas. In a demo garden where you have visitors, obviously this would cause problems. So the two that I'm going to talk about are woven wire fences and plastic mesh deer exclusion fences. So a woven wire fence, sometimes the woven wire is combined with a high tensile wire. The high tensile wire goes up top because it's going to get less interaction with the deer. We have a publication that outlines some costs. This one is about 5 to 7 per linear foot. This includes labor and materials. These generally have a 25 to 30-year lifespan, and it's generally recommended that an 8-foot height seems to be good, but you could go a little bit higher to keep those super high jumpers out. These are generally constructed of 2 layers of 4-foot rolls of woven wire to give you that 8-foot height. These do have certain requirements for post height, post depth, bracing on the posts. The next one I'm just going to mention is a cheaper option. This is plastic mesh deer exclusion fence, much cheaper per linear foot. In terms of the lifespan of these materials, it's kind of hard to find good information on that, but 6 to 8 years of field life for the regular, and then the heavy duty material could be 10 plus years. These come in a standard height of 7.5 foot. That's how tall they come off the roll. It's generally suggested to attach some kind of white streamers to the mesh to enhance visibility. I think that would probably be recommended on both fence so deer can see them and you reduce the risk of a deer jumping into it and getting hurt. So those are the two non-electric deer fences that are basically recommended, have been proven to be effective to keep deer out. Because this is a lighter weight material and you're not tensioning wires, you're tensioning a thick monofilament line, there is a lower number of posts that are required and a smaller amount of bracing, but still a significant investment when you're going out, hundreds of feet potentially. Thinking about fence installation, anytime you're doing digging, you want to call Dig Right in Missouri. You might also want to check with your local zoning ordinances or the park rules for this specific question. You're going to need to think about gate access and how wide you need that gate to be. You're going to want to have some kind of working perimeter within that fence so you're not banging around on the fence all the time. You can get your equipment around. You also might want to build to have room for expansion so that you're not running into a situation where the garden quickly outgrows the fence that you're putting in. Any fence, just make sure you're following the appropriate design specs. There's some good stuff from different universities on appropriately installing that. You'll need to figure out, is this something that you or maybe some volunteers are going to be capable of, or is it something that you need to hire out? And also whether you're going to be shipping those materials, or is there a local source that you can pick up from that will decrease costs? The MU extension guide sheet that we dropped in the chat there, that does have some information on plant selection. Obviously, if you have an established garden or an annual vegetable garden, you're not going to be able to pick and choose what you want to plant. But there is a list in that publication of a bunch of different plants in terms of their rating of how often they're severely damaged. And these are just some of the resources that have been dropped in the chat box.